Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to SF Live. I'm your host, Myrna Lim. Tonight, we're very fortunate to have a special guest who has to take two buses to get here. Mrs. Transfer and had gotten off the wrong bus and had to walk here all the way here, but it's all worth it. We have Mr. Mohammed Talaat, who is an assistant professor at the University of Cairo. It's a privilege to have him here tonight. We've been watching and we've been talking about what's going on in Egypt. Egypt has a special place in my heart. I spent some 2 weeks there, one of the best vacations that I've ever had in my life. And anyway, I'm delighted that we have Muhammad tonight. Welcome. How are
Thank
you?
you, Myrna. Thank you very much for having me. And
I had to.
I guess I don't sound so professorial when I have to admit that I had a long roundabout way to come here.
Well, I had to tell that to the audience to let them know how difficult you had to work to get here.
I'm glad you did. Engineers usually take the shortest point between between 2 points, but I guess as a Bay Area engineer, I had to do it in a funky way.
You had to get your
San Francisco does everything in a different way.
So anyway, I know how we've been talking via email the last few days, and you're telling me, "Oh my God, I've been in meetings all day. I've been working so hard." I could realize what's going on. And tomorrow you have a big rally, right, in San Francisco regarding Egypt.
Saturday there's going to be a rally that mostly the Libyan community has called for, and a much larger Arab, Middle Eastern, North African, U.S. Communities are going to show up in support of Libya because of what's going on, horrible events going on there.
Exactly. Okay, let's go back to Egypt. Let's deal with one country at a time.
Right.
So anyway, for most Americans, we think about Egypt as, to me, I was mesmerized as a kid, the Sphinx, the pyramids, the Tutankhamun. I've gone to the exhibits so many times, Nefertiti, Cleopatra, the whole works. I mean, it just invokes that kind of romance, that kind of mystique, that kind of mystery amongst people. And yet, underneath the surface, there's this, brewing, like a volcano that just erupted. So anyway, tell us about you first. How long you've been in this country? You're an assistant professor, and anyway, just inform us, educate us.
Excellent. Well, I am an engineer. I am an assistant professor at Cairo University. I came here to study and get my degree, and I finished that. I work now in the Bay Area as a civil engineer.
Okay.
I still am staff member at Cairo University, and I go there sometimes and teach short courses, but I'm technically on leave until I go back.
Okay.
I grew up in Egypt, in Cairo. My family mostly lives there now. I have a sister which temporarily lives in London, but I grew up there most of my life, and I just came back from there on January 24th, the day before it all started.
Wow, okay.
So you add the combination of the jet lag, what's happening there 10 hours away from our time zone, and the fact that I just came back from there, and you can imagine how much sleep I was not getting over the 2 weeks where everything unfolded, and then having to go to work and meet deadlines and deal with a lot of backlog that has been piling up as I was on vacation in Egypt. Hence come all the meetings and the deadlines that I've been to. I had to balance those two things and make up on sleep on the weekends when I could. So finally now, as things are slowing down, I'm starting to get back to a normal sleeping pattern and focus more on getting work back to normal.
Now Mubarak, President Mubarak, the whole revolution that just happened is quite startling for people in the West to see. Of course, his predecessor, Anwar Sadat, is beloved by the world, and so then Mubarak came on the scene, and he's been there though for 30 years. is there a difference that much, that kind of a stark difference between him and Anwar Sadat? If Anwar Sadat has not been assassinated, and then we get into ifs here, would this kind of revolution, would it have happened or not? I mean,
sure. Well, when you think of Egypt, usually, as you said, you think
Right.
of pyramids and
exactly,
camels, right?
right.
And the scene that we've been seeing over the past 3 weeks,
Right.
if you'll play that first video you have, were very different.
Right.
People demonstrating, people very angry. You could tell that this is not something which happened overnight. It's
Exactly.
been brewing for so long.
It's very bad for my government. I haven't
there are a number
food,
of
I haven't
reasons.
got
That's
game.
one reason.
Right.
Hosni Mubarak started off as a very liked president. He prosecuted cases of corruption that happened in Sadat's rule.
Right.
He was a decorated army officer. He was very well respected for 2 terms, which is about 12 years.
Right.
And then, I think like everybody who stays in power for so long, he ran out of anything new to do.
Right.
And the more the regime focused on just staying in power.
Right.
Because they couldn't believe that Egypt could go forward without them. People were upset at many things. Corruption was rampant.
Right.
Cronyism was very well known.
Right.
Businessmen connected to the regime were profiting a lot. The regime seemed to be grooming the son of the president to become the next president.
Right.
Police brutality was legendary.
Right.
A very known case back in June
Right.
was a case where a young man got beaten to death by the police because he filmed them pilfering from a drug bust and put it on
Wow.
YouTube.
Okay.
And then they said that he was caught with narcotics. He tried to swallow it and he got choked on it and he died. And the photos that came out
Okay.
of it was just gruesome. He was beaten to death.
Right.
So it was an accumulation of so many broken promises of constitutional reform, seconded by claims that we're not ready for democracy yet. And all this blew over at the end.
Yeah, I was in Egypt in 2003, right after 9/11. And even as a tourist, at that time, there's already, we already felt all the tension. Of course, 9/11 just happened. But, we were in a bus, American tourist, and we had armed guards inside the bus. And there's like patrols in front of us, so they're all armed, and then of course behind us. And then when we would get off and go to the market, there'll be a line of gun security guards.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like a princess at that time, but I've never had that kind of security. But then also, when we get to the market, I mean, there are little kids basically selling rocks, so we know that even though we're tourists and we're having this grand time, to me personally, I already know that there is that kind of poverty that, is already there.
Yeah, the poverty was bad and getting worse.
Right.
Economic development brought in a lot more money, but a lot more disparity between rich and poor.
Right, exactly.
The situation you described in the 90s is related, but not directly so. Back in the 90s, there were multiple cases of terrorism. There were armed groups which were fundamentalist Islamists. They had an extreme interpretation. They were trying to bring down the regime by attacking its economical base, which was tourism. Industry was a big base. Also, they looked at foreigners as unwelcome, and they were trying to attack them. This was neutralized, and the whole country, whether Mubarak or everybody in the street, wanted this to be dealt with, and it was dealt with, and it was pacified, and people actually liked the fact that this threat was eliminated.
Right.
As brutal as it was, people didn't like that part of it sometimes, but it was eliminated.
Right.
What happened in 2000s was slightly different. It was a revolution against the regime essentially appropriating the country,
Right.
and people feeling that they don't own their country anymore. They don't belong there. They don't have a sense of responsibility, and they want it back.
Right.
They want to be the masters of their own destiny,
Right.
and not be told what to do like subjects in medieval times.
Right, right. Now, Egypt is wealthy in oil, right? I mean-
Egypt has some oil. It is not a major player on the oil market.
Not compared to like Iraq or Iran,
yeah.
right?
It
But
is
still
not
it
compared.
does.
It does have a decent amount of oil. It also has 82 million people
Right.
and transportation infrastructure.
Right.
So after it uses oil internally,
Right.
there remains some oil to export, but not enough to be a major player
Right,
like Saudi
right.
Arabia or Iraq or Iran.
But the main industry is tourism.
Tourism, the Suez Canal
Right.
is a major source of national income,
Right.
and some industries.
Right. You know was kind of a pleasant surprise for me that kind of showed my naivety about Egypt was when I was looking around and I was asking, our guides and stuff. I says, how come these houses have no roofs? Right? I was like, looking at this house, they have no roof, and they go, well, because it doesn't rain. And, it rains about 2 inches per year, and the precipitation literally does not make it to, the stratosphere, right? So that, and then, as we were leaving, even though I enjoyed Cairo so much, there's like 17 million people in Cairo?
Yeah.
I was coughing my head off. I think I had gotten a respiratory problem. Now, for a country like Egypt, is that to you a reflection of the government's inability to, sustain and provide the basic services that people really ultimately need there in terms of environmental protection, in terms of, keeping the infrastructure and...
In my view, it was a failure of the government to recognize what its role and its priorities
Right.
are. There are more basic needs to be done and dealt with. It is more important to keep a country environmentally safe
Right.
than to make sure it provides a certain growth rate.
Right.
A hallmark of the last 8 years,
Right.
maybe it's like less than that, was an emergence of a new crop of executives, of ministers in the Egyptian cabinet. The balance of power shifted from ex-military generals to businessmen.
Okay.
And the language of the government started changing from very militaristic kind of patriotic rhetoric to number-based, economic indicator-based statistics, which
Right.
they quoted very eloquently. And they were always able to silence any opposition by showing numbers that so Egypt is doing great.
Right.
One well-noted example is businessman Ahmed Aziz, who was a prominent member of the parliament, and he is the person who would put legislature for the national budget,
Right.
which would then reflect on his income as a wealthy businessman,
Right.
and someone with monopoly on the steel industry in the country. So on the face of it, they used language which was very economically sound.
Right.
But everybody knew it was not sound from inside. And when you look on the street, it didn't translate into real tangible effects. Like you say, people were getting poorer, basic needs weren't there. Definitely the pollution was getting worse. Every year I go there, I feel like I'm choking up more and more.
Right. Right.
And I also always debate whether it's just my tolerance getting lower or things actually getting worse.
Right. Right. Well, the Nile River is really the lifeblood of Egypt,
Pretty much,
right?
yes.
Isn't it that every year, basically, you have the land, the Nile River is getting narrower and narrower, right? Because of the sedimentation that it's being eaten up by...
It is. It's getting definitely more polluted
Right.
because of all the waste and unlawful but tolerated behavior that happens
Right.
from agriculture and from industries on the
Right.
banks. The land was getting less fertile because of many effects. One of them was just even the dam, the high dam was
Right.
preventing the fertile clay from being transported along the Nile and
Right.
replenishing the land.
Right.
So part of it is environmental and part of it is just bad management.
Right.
But not exactly getting narrower. It was just
Right.
getting maybe, as you say, less fertile.
Well, the ancient society, the political structure is a very complicated one. Okay, here in America, we elect our presidents twice, right?
Mm-hmm.
8 years you're out, right? Now in Egypt, I mean, look, this guy has been there for 30 years. There's no term limits, obviously.
Right.
How is there like okay? So there's a president. Is there a vice president? Is there a parliament or a legislature compared to like the American system or?
It seems very complicated to someone used to the political system in the U.S. It's very simple though.
Yeah. One man rule, right?
Exactly. There's a president.
Yeah, right.
There's a constitution.
Okay.
It says that the president can essentially has all powers. He dismisses parliament. He convenes parliament. He appoints a prime minister. He dismisses the cabinet.
Oh, really?
He
like
appoints a vice president if he wishes to. He is the one who calls for a change of constitution. He's the only one capable of doing that.
That was a constitution that was made when?
It was patched. It was made first in the 50s and then patched up and reinvented in the 70s, and a number of amendments as it went along. Initially, it had a term limit when it was revised in the early 70s.
Oh,
so
really?
that put a 2-year term. As he was approaching the end of his second term, he threw that out in order to run for a third term.
Oh.
Unfortunately, he got assassinated. He never saw the benefit of that change, and then we ended up with Mubarak staying for 5 terms. He's
so
the one person in the
term
country.
was never changed, or
It
was going to be 3 years, 3 terms, and then he ended up.
It used to be two terms, but now it's unlimited for a 6-year term, and it's unlimited terms. The president is the one person who can sign treaties and approve it, and he just tells Parliament that he had signed the treaty.
Right.
So it's very simple in that regard.
Oh, I see. It's just
it has a pretense of a
democracy, but it's not
democracy.
really.
There's a legislature, there's a judicial branch, there's an executive branch, but the executive branch has all control over 2 other branches, and he's not being overseen by any of the 2 other branches.
Well, let's talk about the culture too, because I think the West is looking at Egypt and kind of worried that, hey, we don't want Egypt to become Iran.
Of course, yes. This is the big elephant in the room, right?
The biggest nightmare would be if you have Khomeini suddenly, a lookalike of Khomeini suddenly taking over. But I think what that brings up then is a question of the role of women and children. When I was there, we visited orphanages, right? Beautiful, beautiful children, beautiful, beautiful babies. And then, so I said, asked some of the caretakers, and says, well, how come you have so many babies here? Aren't they getting adopted? And they said, it's illegal to adopt children. So then I said, well, if they're not being adopted, what do they do? I mean, you see them out in the street and so forth. Isn't it a lot better to allow people to adopt them rather than, having a tough life? And then women obviously are strong, but at the same time, they have yet to be allowed to, I guess, to rise to the surface. I mean, they're kept under their thumb, under somebody's thumb, right?
Well, you mentioned 2 things, the Iran scenario and the role of women.
Yeah, right.
And let me start with Iran. Egypt is not Iran.
Oh, well, thank God, all right.
For a number of reasons.
Yeah,
for better or for worse. But for a number of reasons, the Iranian scenario is just not a possibility.
The Brotherhood of Islam or
the
something?
Muslim Brotherhood is a scarecrow that Mubarak for so many years has used to convince the West that either choose stability and me with some infringement on civil rights, or I open up a full democracy and you get the Brotherhood.
And then, that's good to know.
And then the conversation stops there.
Unfortunately,
the Muslim Brotherhood has in its name 2 words which are very ominous sounding in American context. They have Muslim, and I'm not going to go into that. And they have Brotherhood, which sounds like a Masonic or a secret society.
Do you have any more slides you want to show? Or?
I will in a second.
Right. We're running out of time.
When we get to the role of women, we'll get there.
All right.
So they're not a secret society like the Masons, which is trying to take over and have a theocratic state.
Right. Okay.
And I can go into a long history, but that's not the case. I'm just telling you, it's not this. They're mostly middle class and lower middle class and upper middle class professionals, and they're mostly very well educated. They actually criticize for not having enough base among the masses and labor, and for being almost elitist. So it's not an angry mob.
So are you looking forward there, to the new future of
I definitely am.
Egypt?
I most definitely am.
And are the people looking forward to?
For sure. I mean, yeah.
Who is going to be? Who is going to be the new leader?
If I knew, I would not be sitting here.
You mean you're not running for office? Isn't there supposed to be an election coming up in 6 months or something?
Probably. It's still to be debated. There are some people asking for 6 months, some people saying it's too soon. So we'll see.
But who's the caretaker government?
The army now is in control. They're sending all signs so far that they are not going, they're not there to stay, that they're actually doing what they should be doing, which is transferring power to a civilian government. They have a caretaker government in place. They have asked for initiated a change in constitution. Essentially, they're putting a mechanism where they can, people can elect on as fair and balanced as fair as and free as possible a term, a new parliament, because the last parliament was completely rigged, and then that parliament would be the one responsible for revising the constitution, calling constitutional convention, just starting the whole country from resetting it. Well, you asked about the role of women, and one
as usual, to talk about women, we have 40 seconds.
Right. If you'll play the video that we have here, this is a video which went on 30 seconds? Well, this is the video which sparked the event on 25th. This was a woman. She's obviously a Muslim traditional woman, and she's the one who sent everybody on the street by call.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. We'll be back. Less than 10 seconds. Thank you so much, Mohammed, for coming, and thank you for our wonderful technician who is helping us tonight. President is very complicated.